Patricia Berry, hello again.
Hello, live take two. Thank you everybody for your patience.
That was the first time we've had a technical difficulty, so it was a little confusing. But hello, welcome to White Women. That's us talking about white women. That's this. Patricia Berry, hi, welcome.
Hi.
I'm glad to see you.
Nice to see you. And I'm just going to give you a little personal kudos. Jess, you have made this very seamless. So I know this was a little bobbled today, but I really do appreciate all this technical stuff that you do on this. So I'm Patricia Berry. Lucky to be in both friendship and community with this lovely human. And we're here today to talk a little bit more about chapter 8 of the book, but also I think specifically to talk about some of the reflections that it brought up for us. I think working on this book for me, particularly with you, Jess, has just been a continuing, really fertile ground for learning and I think exploring our relationship to community and being anti-racist in ourselves and our community. I've just learned a lot. Like this type of conversation has taken on a lot of deep meaning for me. So I'm just going to give you another appreciation.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about who we are and then our working agreements and get into the juice of the juice. So I'm Jess Letaw. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I come to racial learning work as a native Southerner, adoptive Midwesterner, and someone who just struggles. I don't want to say struggles. I work to feel at home in the world, and I work to find ways to feel at home in the world. And one of the ways that I have found brings me community and brings me a feeling of, oh, I kind of understand what's going on here, is learning about race, racialized structures, racism, because learning about those things explains a lot about my experiences that are largely invisibilized to me because I'm white. And so learning about those things helps me feel like I know a little bit more about what's going on. So that's very affirming for me. Who I am in community, I wear a lot of hats. I typically introduce myself as a community organizer for housing justice, which is true, but I like connecting people and ideas, and most of all, being in community with people like my beloved sister friend here, Patricia.
Are you ready for me?
I'm so ready for you.
I'm Patricia Berry, cis, hetero, white, born in the Midwest, but spent most of my adult life on the Upper West Side of New York City, which is a very particular, I think, cultural and centeredness expression for me. Now, for the last 10 years, I'm living back in the Midwest, outside of Detroit. I carry many other identities, which I'll think a little bit more on. I came to this work for one of the reasons. There were many reasons. I guess one reason is I always want to be better at community. I want to be a better participant in community. I want to be somebody who creates community, and I found a lot was hampered by my own internalized racism, and didn't really realize that until I started working on anti-racism work in myself. And professionally, one of the ways that I've really felt called to do this is to think about how organizations exchange wealth and individuals exchange wealth, I guess I should say. Specifically in, many long years working as a fundraiser for big institutions. Like now I run my own business as a coach and a consultant, and specifically thinking about how to decenter whiteness from the practice of nonprofit philanthropy and money getting.
No big deal.
The hardest thing in that conversation is saying no to money, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times our values, you're defined by what you say no to.
That's right.
But that is for me personally, as like a business person who says yes and no to clients all the time. And then as a coach, like, wow, when money gets in there, suddenly my values get very squishy. And staying true to the values when you have economic things at stake. You know, sometimes these nonprofits, they need to keep the lights on and they need to keep people paid. How do you do that while still staying true to the money and trusting that the right kind of money will come to you, the right kind of relationships will come to you?
No, that's real. And we've talked a little bit about, you know, that the economic impacts of, you know, standing up to harmful systems and harmful people. The where the rubber hits the road is very real.
What are you willing to lose? What are you willing to risk? Particularly when you've been trained your entire life that the amount of money you make somehow expresses your worth in the world.
I mean, that's part of it. We're starting to get into the fun conversation now, but I'll say this one thing and then I'm going to throw us into the working agreements, which is, I think one of the reasons that I struggle is like when you talk about ceding power and wealth, for example, if you are as a white person ceding power and wealth, I want to think of myself as ceding power and wealth to, you know, people of color, to women of color. But when you unavail yourself of an opportunity, that's typically not where the resources flow. The resources flow to another white person who's willing to not say the things that you said. You know, and so that is a complicated decision matrix. And speaking of that, let's talk about working agreements.
Yeah, because the thing that comes to mind when you say that is, well, why not me? I'll pass it along. Anyway, Jess, please introduce these working agreements.
So, as a way of ensuring that Patricia and I engage in this learning in a brave and full way, we created these working agreements as a sort of container in which to invite ourselves into depth in ways that are bounded by respect and loving accountability. So, the first working agreement is that we put aside the right to comfort. The world is not a safe space, and so this learning is not safe space, it is a brave space, and we put aside the need for comfort as we learn new things and as we have new conversations. So that was really, I think, the first one that we put on the table.
Another value that we hold is asking for the speed that we need. While I often display myself as an outward processor, it does, particularly for this work, it takes me some reflection time to make sure that I am listening and responding to something from wisdom and not cultural training, which my cultural training was based in racist dynamics. So the speed we need for this learning is one of our values. Another one of our values is resist binary thinking, unless we're specifically referring to race, but understanding that the work that we're doing, there is a gradient of answers. There's a gradient of contexts. Things shift. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do anything without adding in all the other ingredients, and binary thinking doesn't lend itself to that kind of nuance.
And then the last working agreement that we've brought into this space is that we welcome conflict, because in dominant culture and in the Midwest and as cis women, we are often rewarded for being nice instead of being real, and for being conciliatory instead of leaning into necessary disagreement. So Patricia and I invite ourselves and invite you to allow a lot of emotional space to be in conflict with each other, with yourself, with ourselves, and even with the ideas being presented. So when conflict comes up, don't gloss over it, spend time in it, because that is a part of the process. And before we transition off this slide, I just want to give myself snaps for how closely I match the book.
Are you talking about the color of your clothing?
So I can't hear you over how loud my shirt is.
And your shirt, can you just hold up your shirt?
Oh, yes. Yep.
say what it is that these are all local libraries.
These are Ann Arbor's libraries. So this is my home library, and this is my other home library, and this is where my partner and I had our second date. And I studied this one in grad school, and this one is suburban, but it's still kind of amazing. Bam.
This is my nerd friend. That's your nerd t-shirt.
Libraries forever.
All right.
So on to the show. Patricia, how did whiteness show up for you this week? And for folks who are following along on the onlines, this is a check-in, the White Lady check-in that we do, which is to kind of be conscious of how whiteness shows up in our relationships and our dynamics and our work, because it's a good training tool for looking for it in ways that otherwise might be invisible to us. And we felt like that conversation would be helpful here. So what do you think?
For me, it's just a lot of reflection lately. My mother passed away. I grew up in Idaho, and my mother passed away over the winter. And we're just now doing the inurnment, putting the urn in her childhood home in this little tiny town out west. And just kind of thinking about spending time with my family of origin, which is exceptionally white, and then reflecting a lot on my childhood. And you said something to me earlier about not necessarily always remembering specific instances of your internalized racism and the behavior that came from that before you really started doing this learning. And I'm really reflecting on how white my childhood was. You know, I definitely spent time with the few Black families that were available to me. They were certainly around, but it was a very segregated society. And I was very clear about my father, who had a lot of he was a very fearful figure for me. He was very loud. He had a tendency towards violence, both in speech and action, that kind of thing. And when he would criticize me for spending time with my the one Black friend that I had when I was in grade school, felt very dangerous and felt very immobilizing when I think about that. And there's some interesting feelings that I'm having as I'm doing this work, and I'm getting ready to kind of go back and spend time with those people who, like when to speak up about that, things that you are seeing both in yourself as well as the people around you. The family, you and I have spoken about this before, the family, the relationships, those are the places that I have the hardest time speaking up against racism or calling it in.
You and everyone, right? Like, I don't think that's a you problem. I think that that's a human problem.
And the niceness associated with it. So how does whiteness show up for me is I think the deep reflection that I'm having right now about what I'm going back into in a very segregated way. And the town that my mother grew up in was, when she was growing up, extremely segregated. And we had a really weird history with it because we had been wealthy before the 20s, before the what do we call that? The Great Depression. That's the word that I'm looking for. And then lost it all. But so our name is like all over the town. Like it's really strange, but didn't grow up with any kind of, and yet still very, just extremely weird. I don't know how to explain it other than that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think anything is weird.
Yeah. So how about you? How did whiteness show up for you? Or did you have questions about that?
No, not really. I will talk about mine in a moment, but for the moment, I'm just really enjoying that Idaho produced both you and Nicole Hannah-Jones. And like, who knew the world would get shaken by Idaho? That's in the way that it is, and not the way that we thought it would be.
I would be really curious to know how old she is. Like, I'm definitely of a much more I am not sure whether she's younger than me or not. And she's the woman who wrote this really wonderful 1619 series and won the Pulitzer Prize. And now there's a film.
Series, I think.
Series. That was it. Kind of a Ken Burnsian sort of.
Yep.
And that's
Well,
it's a
Ken
Hannah
Burns is
Cole
the original
Jonesian.
Nicole Hannah Jones. That's right. That's right.
My generation, there was certainly, it's one of the, if you look demographically, Idaho is one of the whitest states.
Mm-hmm.
And there were certainly other races there. Farm laborers were often from Mexico, but very segregated into, there were specific towns. There must have been a lot of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, like when I reach back into that history,
Mm-hmm.
all I remember is my one friend, Anthony, and his family who lived close by to us. But his father was the pastor of the Black church,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
300 congregants, like where were they in my childhood that I was
Mm-hmm.
so isolated and kind of the blinders on?
Mm-hmm. That's the invisibilization that we're talking about right there.
Yeah. But now, from everything that I've seen, both demographically, I don't spend a lot of time in Idaho.
Right.
I don't know whether it's integrated, but there's certainly many more points on the demographic scale when you look at Boise in particular, which is where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know which generation.
I think she's about you and me, somewhere between.
I'm 56 this year. I'll be 56.
I'm a fresh 43. So yeah, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. So I appreciate that, how whiteness showed up for you as both very present, but in your reflections of, your past and how that shows up now. I think that's super interesting. For me, this week has been really about white sisterhood, and I mean that in the best possible way of, this book is a part of helping me build a vocabulary and some muscles around how to work more in solidarity with other white folks. I think I had, even in rooms that were deeply diverse, I wasn't really sure how to work with white folks, especially because a lot of the work that I do is around racial reckoning. So figuring out how to navigate their whiteness and our whiteness just felt like too much work to do in a room where I'm working very hard to hold space for Blackness and for all the histories that are in the room. And so I have felt much less alone in some really tough work that I'm doing. It's tough for historical reasons, it's tough for personal and emotional reasons. And so to be in the room with women with whom I am having very honest conversations, it's just such a relief. So that is a way that whiteness has shown up for me this week. Good job. Thank you, white ladies. Thank you for being us. So what do we want to say about the chapter? This chapter was, every time you say love trumps hate, you are enabling hate to flourish.
They had some interesting, like they did another list, right?
Mm-hmm.
They kind of like made some points about how toxic that love trumps hate is, and called out a number of ways, a number of aspects that shows up, like spiritual bypassing, gaslighting, toxic positivity, color blindness, cultural appropriation. So all tools that I would say, me as a nice white lady, I have probably done each and every one of these at varying levels of intensity. One of the questions that I had, and I struggle with this so much. So I'm a Buddhist. I'm an American Buddhist. I'm very clear that I'm American Buddhist. That's a different flavor than a Tibetan Buddhist, a different flavor than any other Buddhist, throughout the world.
Does American, is that an official designation? Does American Buddhism identify itself as such, or is that a qualification that you're giving it?
I'm giving it that qualification. That's one of the things I struggle with. And I'm going to come from a place of, I only know, let's say 4 or 5 places that I have personally encountered and studied. I haven't done an exhaustive study of Buddhism in America.
Yeah, just your
So
experience.
everything that I'm going to say is a little bit of a from my own particular perspective.
Sure.
So here's the things that I struggle with as I didn't even talk about. I was a Buddhist and a practicing Buddhist for a long time, that I never spoke about it. You know, people, you know, when I was, it probably wasn't. I probably started. I was introduced to Buddhism through the Jesuits in New York, where I went to school at Fordham, which is like, if you knew the Jesuits at Fordham, you would probably say, "Oh, that makes perfect sense." Of course you did. So, you know, from my 30s until probably my early 50s, you know, so just a couple years ago, it was just a thing that I did. It was very important to me. I spent time in various Buddhist temples, but hadn't really found like a home temple. But practiced, you know, practiced, created a value set based on it. And only in the last few years have I kind of begun to intertwine my personal and spiritual life with my work life and with everything else. But the thing I'm really aware of is it feels like a little white lady spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity. And it's one of the things that still kind of hampers me sometimes from bringing essentially the full expression of kind of my value set, because I'm always very careful about how that hits, and I still have complicated feelings about it. So the reason I refer to American Buddhists as American Buddhists is because I do think it's different. We are Americans. Even the Dalai Lama says you can't be a Buddhist the same way that he is, because he grew up in a different environment. It was totally different. So, you know, we have like this kind of cultural underlay that then we add Buddhism over the top of, and the cultural underlay is often based on Judeo-Christian, Puritan-inspired values that we then are essentially having a conversation with Buddhism on the top of that. And doing all sorts of work. Sometimes other Buddhists that I meet, what rankles with me is that we feel like somehow like the anti-racist work doesn't apply to me because I'm a good Buddhist. I'm Buddhist. I can't be racist. I'm filled with light.
I wonder if that's universal to. So I am not a deeply religious person. I was brought up in the Catholic and Baptist churches, and pretty much as soon as I had agency, shot both of them out the window, and have just pursued spirituality in different ways. So I am coming not from a particular faith, but I wonder if that's a common response of people of faith who say, well, I am, you know, deeply in my faith. I could not possibly be racist. I will say, I don't have it to hand because my partner borrowed it, but there's a book called Me and White Supremacy that was written by a Black Muslim woman, Layla Saad, who wrote the book to white women of faith. That was the original driver of the book, because she felt like she was having the worst conversations with white women of faith, particularly Christian, but, you know, white women of any faith. And so I wonder if that is somewhat universal to like American people of faith, that they feel like that faith shields them from accusations of racism.
I feel like the flavor in Buddhism is sometimes more energetic. It's like somehow it's that, and this is where I would put the cultural appropriation kind of overlay on it. Like it's all that yoga, you know, white lady yoga kind of consciousness that I am going to be so militant about my health and perfectionism and all this stuff. And then I'm going to funnel it through a practice that I'm going to be the perfect yoga practitioner. When you look at yoga as a religion, it has nothing to do with your body. Right. Like all the yoga stuff that you're doing is just preparing yourself for the spiritual aspect. So for me, it feels like it falls into kind of when I was studying in college, there was I'm going to forget what the sociological term, but it's the Eastern expansion. It's a certain
I know what you mean. Yeah,
a certain like we feel like that's somehow, you know, something that that we need to take on. I feel like some of the Buddhists that I personally have experienced in America, who grew up in whatever the cultural reality was in America, it feels more than, it feels different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't know if I want to unpack too much, because I don't know that I'm that informed on it. But one thing that I will say that has helped me along the way is there's a wonderful book called Radical Dharma.
Oh God, talk about, you don't need to be a Buddhist to just sink into that book. That is so good.
That blew my mind. The last temple that I was a part of, I tried to get a book group going, and it was an all-white temple. And I said, well, we have this opportunity here as all white people. Perhaps we can take a look at our whiteness, right? Create a cultural conversation in this moment without thinking that our work is to go scoop BIPOC people up off the street and force them to come into our temple. You know, like, instead of asking, like, why don't the Black people don't want to be here? Or why can't we get Black people to come here? Why are they not welcome? Why do they not feel comfortable? And then I also have some discomfort with American Buddhism putting on literally the clothes of their Asian
counterparts, forebears.
Forebears. I don't know exactly what the word would be. Like, there's a little bit in that I'm like, am I like doing some kind of weird theater? That why can't I show up in my clothes? You know, the clothes that I was born in, because I don't think Buddha would care that I'm wearing a particular kind of like outfit. But as you progress, right, in any of the temples that I've been a part in, you suddenly have to begin to don clothes that are not yours. And I get it that you've got to be in belonging. But anyway, I feel like I'm getting off the track. I often sit with, am I using my Buddhism as toxic positivity, spiritual bypassing, or in some way cultural appropriation? And how do I know the difference? It's a very long answer for that. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I always love hearing what you're wrestling with, because I overlay on that me. I'm like, what do I have in common? What are you wrestling with that doesn't feel confusing to me, and why is that? Like, have I missed something? Have I solved something? Is something not relevant to me? So it's always interesting. Coming back to the book content a little bit, what they have some sections in this chapter sort of describing different tools of how white folks and white women in particular use sets of tools to sidestep complicity in racism, complicity in upholding white supremacy and white terrorism, and just sort of say, that's not me, that's over there, I don't need to look at it. So one, as you mentioned, was spiritual bypassing. Another one is gaslighting, a very particular one. Another one is color blindness. I don't see color, therefore I can't be racist. As you mentioned, cultural appropriation. And then the one that really kind of stuck the landing with me on this chapter was toxic positivity, but not for the reason they meant. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. So some examples that they give in the chapter of toxic positivity. The best is yet to come. Look on the bright side. If I can do it, so can you. Everything happens for a reason. But look at how far we've come. It could be worse. Can't we just all get along? Just love. So what sits with me about that is that I have heard many women say any constellation of those phrases. I've said many of them myself in different contexts. And what struck me is that I feel like when we say these things, we are being reflective and present, when what we are doing is participating in systems that have served up that language and that stance to us. And one of the recurring invitations that I feel from this book is for white women to understand the context in which you operate. These statements, there are a couple of them in particular. I've lost my page. I won't go back to it. But like, if I can do it, so can you. That's one of them.
Oh. There's so many contextual.
I felt that one in my
sides with that. Yeah.
Well, and this list was really the exaltation of individualism, you know, and in that cult of individualism, you don't have to pay attention to context or how your behavior is adversely impacting someone else, even if your intent is good. And so for some reason that list just was a siren song of invitation to me and to white women to understand your context. And that means reading, knowing history, listening to the people around you. That's another thing that really kind of stuck with me from this chapter, is reflecting on who I'm listening to. And for the last 6 years, I've been on a deep project of listening to Black women and finding all different kinds. Like, it's for me, because of the area of the world, just the universe that I find myself, I started with Black women architects. And then it just sort of progressed from there. It's Black women in my community and Black women planners and then Black women poets. And that's been the project. And I have since expanded who I listen to. You know, the Arab American short stories are just an amazing genre in and of itself. But who I'm listening to helps me understand context, because I hear cultures that I'm not in, but that affect the community that I move through. I hear histories that I didn't know and that make me curious. I hear criticisms. I don't often hear them of myself, and that's not to say I don't deserve them. I just think that folks are being really nice, but I hear criticisms of white folks around me, and I'm like, uh-oh, I do that, you know, maybe I shouldn't. And so knowing the context is learning and listening and not saying it. I'm just listening and learning, so I'm not going to participate. Participate and listen and learn. Make your mistakes. Like, you've got to do it, right? We keep talking. You got to get your shoes muddy if you're going to take a walk.
So can I back up on a couple things?
Yeah, because that was a lot.
It was a lot. But and I'm not going to say but. And so here, toxic positivity is like, you have to have hope in the revolution, like psychologically. If we were only on the downbeat, people wouldn't get off their couch. They wouldn't, go forward. Figuring out, and I think context has a lot to do with it, right, and who you're talking with and all the things. But it's one of the things that I think a lot about, because I could very easily at any given moment fall into toxic positivity. And that is all wrapped up in the Buddhist aspect of it. Because part of it is I am also trying to get over a lifelong habit of mind of being a bit of a complainer. And
yep, I see that.
And very I want to say sharp, but there's a better word for it, a more appropriate word that I'm not getting. Sarcastic.
Okay.
Which I feel like my sarcasm and complaint were not very helpful in any given situation. And it was a lot about me and my ego, and I'm better, and why can't everybody else be the way that I am? Or the way that I'd like them to be. So have I swung too far the other way? As I sit in some of my Buddhist values about like the universe, I have a couple sayings that I say all the time. The universe is preparing something for us. That sucks to receive if you're really kind of struggling to get over something that is, real, like not access to healthcare, and I'm sick and it hurts, and, it's racistly motivated, and, and to hear, the nice white lady who's trying to like kind of calm you down, to not listening, but giving you a platitude that's very toxically positive. So I think I just want to like sit with that. Like, how do we know the boundary for a moment? Because I don't think that it can be all doom and gloom, but I think there is some sort of marriage of reality talk, but having a growth mindset. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Yeah, especially in this area, because the book offered many examples of toxic positivity, but it did not spend time in this chapter on what healthful, helpful positivity could look like. So I spent time thinking about that. And a couple of the things that I came up with were that holding positivity, being love, something that they a phrase that they criticized in this chapter for, I think, some good reasons. But being love can coexist with action and with transformational action and with positive action. So I think beneficial positivity invites us to action, not suppresses it, right? Because toxic positivity, one of the things that it's trying to tell you is, no, you're fine, chill out, no need to do anything. So again, we're not attuned to context. So for ourselves, and for me, for sure, positivity invites towards action and change. And towards other people, the positivity isn't necessarily offering hope. I come back so often to something Roxane Gay said last year in a talk. She said, I don't traffic in hope. I traffic in possibility. And I wonder
that's growth mindset.
I mean. And so I wonder if when we're talking with folks and holding space with folks who are going through that challenge, instead of offering the rainbow, just offering the space, right? I listen, I'm here. You have one of my favorite questions when I'm going through hard times, which is, what do you need from me as a friend right now? Can we offer that question to the folks around us? My partner asked me the same thing. How can I be a good partner? I can just get good questions from the people around me. Lucky me. So I wonder if instead of a statement of hope, can we offer an invitation to the people around us? And then that is a positivity, but not a suppressive or oppressive one, I think.
Yeah. I think about current movements right now, right?
Black Lives Matter. What a hopeful statement.
Yes. But not toxically positive.
No.
It's not saying Black lives have always mattered. You just haven't noticed.
That's right. No, and it's an absolute invitation to action. Black Lives Matter, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that's an interesting place for me to sit with. Because I do try, and this is an evolution of my aging and hopefully getting a little wiser, is trying to get out of my conclusionary thinking. And I think that is toxic positivity, right? Here's the conclusion. It's all going to be fine.
That's right.
Or the other one that I really dislike is, it's all good. No, it's actually not. But thanks for playing. That what I try to do in response to that is to be curious. And to me, that is resonant with Roxane Gay's idea of possibility. Can I be curious in this moment about what you might need? Can I be curious in this moment about what you would like from me? That by kind of beginning to more base my behavioral engagement in questions rather than answers or conclusions, that feels like the place of the possible. It's not my conclusion, it's our conclusion.
I enjoy that. That's resonant with a set of questions that a friend of mine asks. She is an age peer to you and I, and is learning to listen in ways that are productive. And she says she's learned to ask of folks who are sharing, something difficult with her, do you want me to feel with you or do you want me to fix with you? And I love that so much. I said, "What do they say?" She was like, "Oh, every time it's feel. Nobody wants me to solve their problems." I'm like, "Well,
Oh, that's so interesting because I ask a version of that question a
mhm.
lot, and I got about a 50-50 split.
Okay, okay,
But that invites me to ask perhaps a follow-up question just to make sure that they're not saying what they think I want to hear, which is I like
mhm."
being a fixer. It's
Well,
part of the white lady heroism, right?
maybe, and the friend whose anecdote I'm sharing is a Black woman, and I wonder what she's holding space for,
Hmm.
right? So maybe she's holding space for stuff that fixing is not the point.
Hmm. Hmm.
I wonder.
Yeah, it's really been a lifelong evolution to be a better listener.
Mhm,
Um, I feel like one of the things that if we all taught in schools,
mhm,
I was never taught in school how to be. I mean, they certainly wished that I would shut up more,
mhm,
but I was never really taught what is on the other side of shut up.
mhm,
Um, that listening actually is something different, and it's really like a muscle.
mhm, mhm. Actually, that brings me back to one of the quotes in the chapter. Um, oh, which one? Oh, so listening is a muscle brings me to the quote directly from the book. You think your platitudes are somehow novel, that we haven't heard them before, that we don't hear them every single day, that they are helpful, clever, even ingenious, rather than harmful, common, and intellectually vacant. And again, I think that comes from not listening to the folks around us, because if we don't pay attention to the people physically online, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, if we're not listening carefully, we don't hear where we're copying, right? And then we do have this illusion that we have invented ourselves from whole cloth, rather than fully being born from the culture in which we marinate. I heard the phrase recently, trying to understand racism in this culture is like a fish trying to study water. And that makes a ton of sense. And yet we are inexorably called to it, right? Like we
Hmm.
must.
Hmm. And what that makes me think of is, if you're really in community with somebody
Mhm,
and really would like to share that heart space with them, um, they remember how you make them feel,
mhm,
not what you said to them. Like, I'm not going to say anything that's
mhm,
going to suddenly, you know, solve whatever the, painful experience that you're having. But if I'm sitting with you, some of my favorite Buddhist practitioners, like that's kind of the stories that they tell about, going to sit with somebody who's depressed and just holding their feet,
yeah. Oh, I love that.
and not rubbing their feet and not giving them a massage, but
Mhm,
just that physical connective expression.
mhm,
So I do often think about that um, particular story, who I can't remember which Buddhist teacher. It was an American Buddhist teacher, but I
mhm,
can't remember which one, that tells it that I think about conversation as a way of holding somebody's feet,
mhm, mhm.
that I don't have to do anything. I just have to be there for it.
That's a big part of why I engage in the racial reckoning work that I do, which is a lot of excavating histories that are there but typically not told,
Hmm.
or excavating histories that uh, don't have a real narrative behind it in terms of like academia or journalism or cultural identity, but are actually absolutely a part of people's lived experience. And so the racial reckoning work that I do is about being in deep community with folks who have been harmed and would like to articulate why, in the service of a more just, more whole, more healthful future. Those are hard rooms, those are hard conversations, but the point is not only that they're hard, the point is also that we bring our full selves into the room. And I gotta say, those relationships are my hope.
Hmm.
I don't say anymore. I probably used to, but I don't say anymore, it'll be fine. I'm not sure anything's good. Everything will eventually be fine. Ugh. I don't say it'll be fine, but I know that when I move in community as my full self, listening to folks who are sharing every part of their history in the service of the community that we both want to knit together, that's my positivity, you know. And it's nothing about toxicity, it's nothing about suppression or oppression. It's about both of us showing up fully for each other. It's a lot.
I mean, that's showing up as a whole self. To me, I feel like that's one of the crux of the thing that I'm working on now. I've never been a person who wants to come home and leave it all behind. You know, come home from the workday and leave it all behind.
Right.
You know, there's certainly aspects that I'd like to leave behind for at least a couple hours. But for the most part, I want to do work and be the person that is fully connected to whatever that work is. Because it also informs my life and makes it, and I recognize that as a privilege.
A privilege and a choice. Not everyone makes that choice.
But one of the things I think about is how much I'm sorry, I went away for a minute. I apologize. Am I back?
You are very present.
That how much I left behind when I was at work by not, you know, hopefully, you know, not oversharing, but trying to think about what do I keep from people that would actually be important for them to know.
Right.
And certainly my faith is one of those things. But I don't know if I'm comfortable with everybody else waving their faith in front of me. Isn't that awful? That
not necessarily. I mean, yeah, I do know what you mean. I do know what you mean, but it's not about divining everybody else's experience. It's about figuring out how you are navigating the space, navigating whatever space you're in, and how other folks show up as well. I will say that's actually a little bit off track, and I want to make sure that we're keeping fidelity to the book and the conversation. So I'm going to go back to my notes and just make sure that there wasn't anything that I wanted to make sure I said today that I haven't yet. I think I'll close for myself. I'll close on another quote from the book, which is about these tools, right? The gaslighting, the spiritual bypassing, the toxic positivity, and so on. Don't do this, white women. Stop denying, stop deflecting, stop erasing, stop bright-siding everything. The only people served by bright-siding racism are you, white folks. You commit the harm and then expect us to see the good in it.
Was that a quote from the book, or was that a quote from you?
That was just me being very expressive and reading the quote from the book. Yep, that's directly from the book, and that invitation resonated from this chapter.
I don't know if I have anything that resonant to close with. I have a lot of swirly thoughts, but I think that this book and these conversations in general always leave me with a lot of really good swirly thoughts.
We keep talking about necessary discomfort, and
yeah,
I feel like this chapter invited some of that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in particular, I was kind of, you and I had sparked a couple conversations about this previously, but was trying really hard to remember instances before I started this work where I did do something very harmful. And I remember one particular instance, and I still think about it. So there must have been an emotional response that I knew I was doing something wrong. And it's only now that I've been able to tease out the context of what I did. So I was a young consultant in New York, living in a neighborhood on the Upper West Side, and had a coworker who I worked with who lived across the street from me on the Upper West Side, who was Asian, Southeast Asian. And we were at work one day and we were chit-chatting, and I remember asking kind of the group, there was probably 5 or 6 of us, who knows a good karate place around town? And I turned to Vince and I said, do you know a good karate place? And Vince looked at me, he's like, are you doing that because I'm Asian? And I remember feeling uncomfortable and called out.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said in response was, no, I said it because you live in the neighborhood. But really,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I walked away from that. Fine, I defended myself,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and left him with a microaggression that was not so micro.
Right.
Um,
Because intent and impact didn't line up.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those places that somatics and somatic memory has helped me, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
where is the memory of the times that I felt uncomfortable? And now let me think about what really happened there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. So gaslighting certainly is something that I've done when feeling called out or asked for a boundary that I'm not willing to give or don't feel like I have to give.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. For folks who are watching this on the onlines, I'd be curious if you felt like sharing. I'd be curious about if anything from this chapter or this conversation really sparked a memory of a conversation that you've had that either made you uncomfortable, that felt sort of like something's not right here, either on your end or on the other person's end, or where, like with Patricia and I right now, we're sort of working through some of these things that, as you say, feel squishy, um, that feel like open questions of, okay, but I hold the value of positivity, I think, but you're telling me it's toxic, so how do I work with it? So I'm just curious how you are finding some of these ideas workable, or how you've had conversations around some of these ideas. So if you feel like sharing, I'm always really interested to hear people's experiences. I learn deeply from hearing those stories. So if you are on the online watching this at some point, I would just be curious to hear your stories.
Mm-hmm. And we keep an eye on these posts. So if you post a question, we're happy to respond to it or engage.
Well, I think we did it.
I think that's what I have for today. Sometimes I wish we could carry a microphone with us for all of these little conversations that we have over coffee and other places and stuff too. But thank you for bringing your whole heart into this, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
As always, it's a pleasure to share this space and this work with you.
It is. All right. See you next time.